I think Pharika is the most underappreciated god in all of the Theros pantheon. As it stands, she is currently the 5th least played Theros god. I've been playing her in paper now as a casual commander for 7 months, and trying to brew around her for even longer. And with that knowledge, hopefully I can warm you up to this deceptively powerful card, and perhaps maybe even tell you about how she changed my thinking about decks in general. For starters, I do want to give some context to Pharika's position. Take this with a grain of salt, because not everyone puts their deck list online, so EDH Rec isn't exactly pinpoint accurate as a source of data, but it still gives some insight into some trends. When compared to other Theros gods, Pharika is nestled in between Old Thassa and New Nylea. But what is absurd to me about this is that Klothys, a god with next to no synergy, who tends to be built as a group slug pile, has 1,300 more decks than Pharika. And here's the thing. At least Klothys has pet card potential from her seeing play in Pioneer, and being a somewhat decent hate card. What I find inexcusable, though, is that Pharika is below what I consider one of the worst Theros gods, Keranos, by nearly 300 decks. This puts Keranos in the top 1,000 commanders, but not Pharika. While building Pharika, I wanted to look to see what other people did first. Looking on Moxfield, the top 4 decks consist of a Protean Hulk combo deck, an admittedly cool mutate deck that uses Pharika as an indestructible body for mutating on, and 2 flat-out Enchantress decks, one with 14 creatures and one with 24 creatures. I'll mention later why creature count is so important to me. While all these decks are fine, I'm not mentioning them because I think they're bad decks. I just felt as though they didn't use Pharika's ability as much as I wanted to lean into. Most of the decks just felt like Pharika was an afterthought, and didn't want to build around her ability as much as I wanted to. Put a pin in that. There's a reason. Another thing I saw was an article listed on the EDH rec page for Pharika called Sift Through Sands, which is a series by Wes Stuckey, which included Pharika as a Umori companion deck for enchantments. The primer mentioned milling cards into the graveyard and then exiling them with Pharika to create snakes, which is the direction I wanted to move in. So I read ahead and saw that the deck itself only ran about 15 creatures, which felt like an incredibly low number of targets for Pharika's ability. No doubt, Umori Companion for enchantments was a very optimistic restriction to take while building Pharika, one that I now knew I wasn't too interested in exploring. With all this, it seemed I'd have to go and build the deck myself. It was these hours in Scryfall looking for synergy that made me warm up to Pharika. Call it Stockholm Syndrome or rose-tinted glasses, but I don't think there's a single card that has as much nuance as Pharika does when it comes to a deck that is built around maximizing the value of her activated ability. Admittedly, I didn't know that at first, like the other deck builders before me. I was originally drawn to the card for its cool artwork, and wanted to see if I could make a good deck around a jank card. But, over the course of a year, Pharika went from this janky pile to an actually formidable and resilient threat. To tell you why, I need to explain now how I built her after all that research. Pharika, like all true Theros gods, is indestructible and isn't a creature until you reach a threshold of devotion. Unlike most other Theros gods, though, she doesn't have a passive or triggered ability. Beyond that, she has a color-intensive activated ability. For a green and a black mana, you can exile a creature card from a graveyard, and its owner, that's right, not you, its owner, creates a 1/1 black and green Death Touch Snake creature token. Now, that face value description is what I and most others I show Pharika see at first. When I started building Pharika, I mostly juggled Death Touch synergy and Snake creature synergy, which was doomed from the start to fail, because the card quality in those archetypes really leaves something to be desired. Also, why would you want to give an opponent a token? Well, don't discount the fun plays you can make with that. You can get threats off the board when they go for what looks like a free attack, but surprise! that player you attacked, they had a creature in their graveyard, and I have 2 mana open. Here's a blocker, friend. Even at a table where politics don't get you far, you can at least make your opponent think harder about what attacks they can make, which is very fun, and ultimately that's what Commander's all about. Now, you might have noticed that I omitted a word from this card when describing it. The snakes are enchantment creature tokens. This is a fact many I show the card miss, which is actually probably the coolest part about Pharika. If you exile creatures from your graveyard using her ability, you can trigger constellation effects for each one, while also creating a formidable blocker. I even missed the depth of this when building Pharika. There is an even deeper level you need to look at to maximize Pharika. I can most compare her to a deck that cares about one of the token artifact types, in the same way that a lot of cards care about sacrificing clues or treasure or food or blood. Pharika can be built in a way to care about her snake tokens and how she creates them. As already stated, they are enchantments, so you get all those lovely constellation triggers. You also get more mana with Sanctum Weaver and can pump your lands into larger creatures for finishing blows with Destiny Spinner. But wait, because they are also creatures with low power, you can run Snarling Gorehound to restock your graveyard, and because they are tokens, you can run Jaheira, Friend of the Forest, and Insidious Roots to scale your mana with your board. Oh, look at that too. Insidious Roots triggers when a creature card leaves your graveyard. Each time you activate Pharika, you do that. Surprise past me, you're in the right place at the right time for brewing Pharika. Even though to most, the set Murders at Karlov Manor was not the best, for Pharika, this set was earth-shattering. Insidious Roots and Amzu both joined the copy of Tormod and Skeleton Crew already ran in the deck, and made Pharika just that much more consistent. The fun part about all these cards is that they stack. Each one will trigger when you activate Pharika. This deck runs its fair share of aristocrat cards too, but they don't stack together as nicely as all the previous examples. Let me give you a hypothetical goldfish game state. You activate Pharika. You get a 1/1 snake. You surveil one, which could be a creature that lets you go again. You draw 2 cards. You get a tapped treasure token. Oh, you'll also untap and do this on opponent's turns as well, with a creature that can tap to mill 2 cards to refuel you if needed. Did I mention it's turn 6? This sounds like Christmas, but this is far from the worst case scenario for opponents, and synergy snowballs like this occur frighteningly frequently in real games with the deck. Sure, this is partly due to Brewer's advantage, but you also get the resiliency, consistency, and acceleration of the colors black and green. If you want to playtest it for yourself, or you want some more specific information about the deck strategy, you can check the Moxfield link for the deck down below to playtest it or to read the primer. Hopefully, you agree with me that this is a worthwhile casual strategy, or at the very least, the deck sounds fun to play. So, with that presumption out of the way, let me round about again to asking, why Pharika in the command zone is basically unheard of. Simply put, we have an old commander that is generally considered to be turbo jank that suddenly received a boost in synergy from a new archetype late in its lifetime. Earlier, I told you to put a pin in the point that other deck lists couldn't be built around Pharika, and this is why. Those earlier decks were all over a year old, well after most of this Pharika synergy got printed. They couldn't have made the deck I built today with the cards they had, and yet they are still what you see most when you're trying to build Pharika for your first time. Basically, Magic is a living game. With hundreds of new game pieces being printed every year, one is bound to retroactively make an old card better. And when that does happen, you shouldn't let the phantoms of past deck builders warp your perspective of what is now possible. You should instead try your own hand at building the deck, and come to your own conclusion of what synergy exists. To some extent too, I think some people are seeing these brand new cards and putting them in decks they're already playing, as opposed to asking themselves, what decks that were once impossible do these cards now make possible? This is a question that excites me to no end, and I have Pharika to thank for making me ask it more often. Let me know in the comments what you think about Pharika, as well as if you had a Pharika moment yourself, meaning you found a commander that was super underrated because of unseen synergy, or because of a large gap between the release and the printing of actual support pieces. This is my first video ever, so if you liked it, please consider subscribing so if I make another one, you'll hear about it and maybe like that one as well. Until then, bye!